Welcome to the PlayNation Podcast. I am one of your hosts, Joe, and I am alongside, and I don't think I'm under or overselling this even a little bit, the king of PlayStation. I'm with Micah. Micah, how are you today?
Hey there, Joe. I'm doing pretty fantastic.
Outstanding. Your wellness does my soul very well. It's good to be with you. Good to be with everyone. Thank you for listening. This is a PlayStation Podcast, right? So this is actually an exciting moment. This is our Maiden Voyage, our first episode, right? So welcome. We want to open by just sort of saying that this podcast is for everyone. If this is your first listen, if it's your last listen, welcome to the PlayNation family. We're a video games podcast, and we do want to include you in a show. That is the big piece of it, right? So it's not, you're just not listening to us, right? So you're part of it. And we'll also focus on PlayStation and the lifestyle that entails. We'll focus on the gaming news of the week. It doesn't matter where that takes us. We won't dodge the tough questions. We won't dodge your questions. And we're here to serve you. So that's just kind of a high level view of what we're going to be doing here. Micah, am I missing anything when I say that? I
don't think you're missing anything at all. I think you nailed it right on.
Well, I agree. And look, this has been obviously a strange year. I think that, for a lot of people, it's been sort of a tougher year. I think video games and just in general, I mean, a podcast that accentuates positivity and culture, something that accentuates the arts. I think that's something that I think we could all use a little bit right now.
I agree. I mean, for me, coming from a perspective of being a PC gamer, an Xbox gamer, a PlayStation gamer, and coming into the PlayStation family, only in the last generation, I've definitely felt that I've come to an appreciation of the PlayStation brand and what they bring to things. You don't just have achievements like, you have on Steam and Xbox, you have trophies, it's a little bit more pride, and I like that perspective that Sony brings to things. And I definitely want to celebrate things with PlayStation. I think it's a great brand. I think just talking with you quite often about it has definitely gotten me excited about PlayStation, just simply because of the fact that it's somebody else that shares that enthusiasm for the PlayStation brand itself.
Yeah, and I think every podcast needs sort of that raison d'etre, that reason for existence, right? And I think that celebrating PlayStation, celebrating the culture, and just celebrating sort of all the positive things that are existing within that.
Yoshi's just excited. I mean, that's just what it comes down to.
But just to sort of reiterate that, I do think every podcast does need that raison d'etre, right? That reason for existence. And I think for us, and at least for me, I don't want to speak for you, Micah, but for me, it's about celebrating the culture. It's about bringing that positivity into the world that I think really sorely needs it, right? So, and I think that's really what it's about. And that's what we're going to be doing here. And so we're glad that you can join us. Now, normally we would jump into our first three topics, or first of three topics, right? So to give everyone an idea, on this podcast, we will deep dive into three topics every episode. The topics will be listed in the description so that this way you know what you're getting into, you know what you're listening to, and you know what we're talking about. So in this particular episode, we will be discussing three topics. PlayStation 5, obviously, it's I don't think it's any coincidence that, we're recording these episodes now. PlayStation 5 just came out. It's very fresh, right? It's absolutely the topic du jour. So that will be one topic. Another topic will be the launch lineup. We'll get into that a little bit later. And then lastly, we're going to talk about sort of the relationship between PlayStation and Xbox, the console wars. What does that mean? Is it a positive thing? Is it a negative thing? What does it mean to you? And in between all these, we'll answer your questions, right? So, but before we get into the topics, Micah, I thought it would make sense for the listeners to get an idea for, who you're listening to, who we are, right? I mean, does that, when you think of this, right? So I listed out 4 questions that I think we can answer in short order to give everyone an idea of kind of who we are. The first question, and we can kind of go back and forth on these, right, was the first of which is, when did you get into video games, right? So in other words, when was that moment for you when you got into video games, when video games became an important piece of, sort of your day-to-day, your way to spend your free time? When did you get into video games? How early was it for you, Micah?
So I remember A very specific memory. You remember those old TV sets that were like furnitures, right? It was just gorgeous, had the UHF and VHF knobs on them. I happened to have one in my bedroom, and connected to it was a Commodore 64. Now, Commodore 64, as you know, was just a little keyboard with a diskette on the side. And you're talking like small 4-bit graphics. I'm probably going to get yelled at for being wrong on what it was. But the point is that was my first experience, not just with video games, but computing in general. Then it went into Nintendo. Then it went into Super Nintendo. And then it went into Nintendo 64. As you're seeing a pattern here, I was definitely a Nintendo fanboy for a while. Then the big boys came around, Xbox and things like that. And it wasn't until PlayStation 4 that I got into the PlayStation family. So, but that wasn't my first PlayStation experience though. So we'll definitely talk about that later, but that's how I got into video games. Just very, very, very sharp memories like that. Just like remembering those small things like that.
The Commodore 64, that goes way back. That is an authentic piece right there, right? So, but for me, it was Christmas, I believe it was 1990, but it was Christmas 1990 was I think maybe to this day, still the greatest gift I ever received for Christmas was the original Nintendo Entertainment System. And, in the neighborhood where I grew up in, it was, 3 houses down. This guy, Pete, this kid, Pete, we would go over his house. We'd play his Nintendo. He had Mega Man. He obviously had Mario. He had this, shout out to Wizards and Warriors. He had Wizards and Warriors, but we would go down there and we would play it. And it was so much fun. We begged our parents, my brother and myself, we would beg our parents for the original Nintendo. One Christmas, we get it. It's what you would imagine. It's balloons, it's celebration, it's everything to do with that. We would connect it into our little den. We had one of those old curved CRT TVs, plugged it in there, and it was just absolutely a joy, right? We played through Mario, we played through Duck Hunt. I became like obsessed with Mega Man. Like you, Micah, I was a Nintendo fanboy for most of my life. I call myself now a reformed Nintendo fan. But I think that was kind of it for me. The original Nintendo, that was the moment for me personally. But when you think of not just video games, but PlayStation specifically, right? So what's your first PlayStation memory?
Oh man, I can remember it perfectly. So I was living at my mom's house, and she was married to my stepdad, and he had a son who was living there. He was probably like 17, 18 at the time. I can't remember. Maybe in his 20s, I forget. But he had a PlayStation, right? 1995, 96, when I lived there, I had a Nintendo 64. He had a PlayStation. So obviously a little fanboyism back then, thinking, mine's better than yours. But you obviously knew what the superior technology was. CD-ROM was just great. But I remember he let me play, which was awesome. He was like, hey, you want to play PlayStation? I'm like, sure, absolutely. He had Resident Evil. So being 10, 12, I can't remember how old I was, and playing Resident Evil for the first time, these 3D graphics, which I thought were gorgeous at the time. And, if I still, remember what things looked like, they absolutely were. But playing that, going in and just getting scared going down that hallway the first time when the dogs start running at you. That's my first PlayStation memory.
I think back to actually the PS2, right? So obviously the PS1, very important piece of hardware, but I think back to the PS2 specifically, not for the PS2 itself, but what came after. Because PlayStation 2 was like right around when I was like in high school, getting into very nefarious things. And like my PlayStation experience back then was, very much Madden and fighting games. What I think a lot of people were sort of into in that moment for PlayStation 2. And it was just that sort of competitive, with your friends all, sort of huddled around the television and you're all playing, that was kind of it. But then what came after? So after that, right around young sort of adulthood, I kind of left video games for a little bit and I, focused on career, other things. And I then dipped back in when the PS3 was just sort of hitting its stride. And I remember playing Uncharted 2 and just being so completely like ears pinned back, blown backwards. It was like I was inside of McDonald's and I stepped outside for a minute just to get a breath of fresh air. And I walked back in and all of a sudden it's a Morton Steakhouse. It was just like, it was the McDonald's when I left. it's like I couldn't believe that this is where video games were going, and this is where it went, right? So we were playing, Madden and fighting games, and now we're having this full-fledged experience, this just totally immersive Uncharted 2, and I remember thinking like, wow, like I can't believe that this is where it's going. And from that moment, even to today, I would say that's sort of the same feeling I have almost every time I play, whatever the new title is. That's kind of what it feels like for me. But and beyond that, I mean, do you have a list of favorite games? Do you have like a favorite video game that you currently list as, oh, well, surely my favorite game of all time? Because I think when people are getting to know us, Micah, I think that's a good way to sort of give people an introduction. What's your favorite game if you had to list one?
So if I had to list just one game, and I could go into a lot of them. I mean, I could tell you all the platformers and sports games and other action games I play, but the one game that I definitely felt an emotional connection to and needed to finish the story and figure out what was happening was Red Dead Redemption 2. Just the absolute gorgeous story of Arthur Morgan and how I actually felt emotionally at the end of that game was just phenomenal for me. And it's really what video games are about. A lot of times it's pew pew kill, but it's really, for me, it's always been about the artistic decisions people make, the visual medium. It's cinema in interactive form.
You really think about all the things that go into a video game, right? So in other words, how many artists do you need, right? So in other words, you need visual artists, you need engineers, you need sound designers, you need to be able to have composers. And in many cases, especially now in AAA games that are coming out in 2020, I mean, you need to, in some cases, enlist an entire orchestra to go through the audio that you want to have. It's a full experience. I never liked sort of the comparison of video games to movies because I feel like video games are just more interactive, right? So in other words, you can passively watch a movie. You can't really passively play a video game, right? I think video games are actually more akin to books in that way. So in other words, if you put a book down, it stops reading itself. But I totally agree with everything you're saying there. I think that for me, when I list of my favorite games, The Last of Us jumps out at me, and that's sort of a very generic answer. But I think it touches on a lot of the things that you're mentioning with that, because it does have this incredible soundtrack from Gustavo, and then you have the story, right? Neil Druckmann and Bruce Straley writing this incredible story, and really it's almost a game about a father and daughter more than anything else.
No, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I agree with that.
And usually when I give that answer, though, sometimes I'll say Mega Man. Mega Man's my favorite game, or Mega Man 2 is my favorite game of all time specifically. But, I would say it's a coin flip between the two, because I grew up on Mega Man 2, and I always consider that to be one of my favorites. But, I mean, through the modern lens, do I still consider it that way? It's close. And then the last question, Micah, that we can answer here, just to give everyone a little intro to us, and then we'll get into the first of our three topics is, and I think this is more of an obtuse question. I like that it's open-ended, but it's, why do you play, right? So when you play video games, why do you play video games?
I think I kind of touched on that answer a little bit.
You did.
I want to be taken out of my normal everyday experience of take a ticket, close a ticket, wash the dishes, this, and it's not a humdrum experience. I love my life. I absolutely love my life, but how often do you get to be a gunslinger in the West? How often do you get to be able to survive a pandemic? Well, hang on a second. But how often do you get to be able to survive a pandemic where they have fungus heads and they're coming at you? And, it's like you experience all these genres of horror, action, strategy games. It's just, there's so many different varying levels of games you can play, but the reason why I play is to take myself out of my experience and experience something new, something that another human being create, a set of human beings, hundreds of human beings, and sometimes just one human being. Like I love indie games, and that's why I play. I just want to experience something new.
And look, I think I answered this a little bit as well. We can, before we get into the topics, but yeah, I think I answered this as well. I think that the art speaks to me. I like the fact that it's community, that it's sort of, it brings people together. I love the fact that as you're playing these games, right? So as you're going through them, I think it's the best way to experience entertainment. It's the best medium to do that. And like I said, it's a very, very active thing. So I enjoy that as well. So that being said, I think we should jump into our first topic. And the topic number one is, as you would expect, it's PlayStation 5 review. On September 17th, pre-orders went live. Some would say in a chaotic and or turbulent fashion.
Oh, yeah.
November 12th, the console releases. And I believe, Micah, you got yours on November 12th.
I did. And
you were day one.
I got to tell you, I earlier in the year, I made a decision. I said, I'm going to get both consoles, and I'm going to get them on launch day, mainly because I have never experienced a console launch before from the perspective of actually getting the consoles on launch day. And I got both. So just so everybody knows, I have the Xbox and I have the PlayStation 5. But I've played the PlayStation 5 more than the Xbox, simply because of many reasons we'll go into. But the experience of going through pre-order, man, what a anxious time that was. Just like, for me, I got lucky. Like the first 9 p.m. pre-order day sold out. But 15 minutes later, Walmart was like, hey, we got more back in stock. I still had it in my cart. I clicked order. And then I hovered for a few seconds before I clicked on pay now. I was like, wait, is that all right? What am I doing? Just click the button. And I got lucky.
I honestly don't know that I've ever experienced a pre-order anything even close to as chaotic as this was. I remember when I got the PS4 and I pre-ordered the PS4, I remember the day it launched, I walked into a Best Buy, and by the way, it really wasn't super difficult to pre-order. I walked into the Best Buy, I went right over to the counter, they went into the back, they got it for me, they handed it to me, and I walked out. And that was kind of, as difficult as it was. PlayStation 5 felt like the most stressful console launch I'd ever been a part of, just because it went live. For starters,
let's remember. Yeah,
Walmart and all of the distributors, they pulled the trigger early.
Yeah,
the pre-orders weren't supposed to go live until something like midnight or something like that, and then the pre-orders started going off around 9-10, just random times. All of a sudden, pre-orders started dropping. Luckily, I was lucky enough to get one. We were talking that whole night, and we were sort of going back and forth on who got one and who didn't. It almost felt like just a weird roulette. But luckily for me, I was able to get one. I snagged one up, but the reality of it is I didn't actually receive, even though I pre-ordered on the first night it was available, I didn't actually receive my console until that Saturday. So November 12th was that Thursday. I didn't get my console until that Saturday. But it was absolutely one of the most difficult, just quite frankly, stressful pre-order situations I'd ever sort of been a part of.
Oh, yeah. I mean, you have to remember. So we were watching that PlayStation 5 showcase and all those great games that were coming out. And we anticipated, we're going to hear the pre-order date. We're going to hear the pre-order date. At the very end, it's just ends and nothing. And it's like, okay. All right. So no pre-order date. Maybe they'll announce it. But then Walmart was the first one to break ranks. They said, we don't feel like you should wait until tomorrow to get the pre-orders. Go ahead and order now. So they did it on the 16th, I want to say, the night before the real pre-order date. Mm-hmm. And it just went out of stock immediately. And we thought we were all screwed, because then Walmart went early, Target went early. And I think you got it that night, wasn't it? That night.
Yeah, you're right. And from Sony's perspective, I think, I don't know. It's easy to sort of throw stones at Sony because they're the ones who are selling the console. But the reality of it is, if the retailers decide to break ranks and go off the chain, and decide that they're going to jump early, once one went early, then they all started going early. There's nothing really Sony can do about that other than sort of say, well, we're not going to sell through you, which they're obviously not going to do that.
My main stone I would throw at Sony is they should have announced at the end of that showcase. That's the main stone.
Yes. That was such a missed opportunity. They could have had an entire 3-minute segment just dedicated to how to pre-order, when pre-orders are going to go live, and what the pre-order system is going to look like. And they completely, not only did they not say anything specific, they just omitted it entirely in terms of not really going after it. And then I think it was on the PlayStation blog. So in other words, it was on the PlayStation blog where they announced all this pre-order information. And it was just totally, like, again, you talk about left field. it just was, you had this perfect opportunity to describe the process, and it just felt like they missed on that. But regardless, right? So I was able to get one. You were able to get one. We've been playing on these things for about a little over a week now, I guess. And, I guess the first thing to discuss would be aesthetics, right? So how the console looks. I mean, doesn't matter to everyone. I know it'll matter to some people, but some people describe the PS5 as this sort of this god-awful ugly machine. Some people say it looks like this, flamboyant, futuristic, machine, right? How do you feel about how the console looks? How does it look to you?
I like the photoshops, I do have to say. But so opening it up, I took a little video because I didn't know if I was going to post it on YouTube or not. And I took a video of the whole unboxing process. And I like that Sony kind of went and said, we can make just a generic little white box. And they decided, you know what? We're going to go straight to space with this thing. It kind of looks like a rocket ship, but people say, no, it looks like a Wi-Fi router. I think the vision is in the eye of who's looking at it. I have to say, from an aesthetic perspective, I like the feel of it. I don't think I smelled it. And I've heard a lot of people say, when they smell the feel, what does it smell like? Plastic? Does it smell like this? I don't think I even smelled it, but I do appreciate the aesthetic design choices. I do have some disagreements with things like the base, but we can go into that later.
The smell is, and again, usually when you get a new piece of hardware or something, you get a new shiny piece of tech. You get that new piece. It has that almost that noxious chemical smell that smells like it's like rotting brain cells. It's one of my favorite smells on the planet. I sound like I'm describing a negative smell. I actually love that smell. It's an incredible smell, but. The PS5, I was reading on, I think it was IGN, something like this, where they described it as the most flamboyant console they'd ever seen, or something along these lines. And then I heard somewhere else they were saying that, well, people are going to walk into my house and they're going to see this, and they're going to say, well, what the heck is that? And I hear these things, and they're describing it negatively, but I love those things. I love the fact that if someone comes into my house and they're like, what the heck is that? That I can sort of have that. It's a conversation piece. I mean, where it's like, you can talk about it and sort of say that. The fact that it looks like a spaceship, I love it. I wish it looked more like a spaceship. I wish, and by the way, that console stand that you mentioned, right, so which is, let's be honest, it doesn't snap in the back. It's not, there's a couple problems with it, right? Real hinky, but I will say this, the fact that it makes the console look like it's floating, I kind of like that.
I mean, for me, it's already on a glass case anyway, so it kind of already looks like it's floating, but you absolutely need that base. Otherwise, it wobbles, and I definitely don't want it to be wobbling. I've got too many cats that would jump on it, and where I've got it tucked neatly into the entertainment center. But I will say, my wife looking at it, she said, it's pretty. So, I mean, the fact that a non-gamer can, appreciate that kind of aesthetic design, I definitely agree. It is pretty. It's nice how the lights light up on it and everything.
I'll be real. It kind of wobbles a little bit with the base. But the one thing I'll say is this, which is that the general, I hear a lot of conversations about how that this is such a grand departure from the aesthetic of previous PlayStation consoles, in the sense that the previous, with the exception of the obvious exception of PS1, that the other consoles are these clean black machines, and that this is sort of not that. And I don't necessarily understand that, because when I think of the PS4, right, it's half matte black and it's half glossy. And then it has this, when you talk about, vertically, it has this blue light going right down the top of it, which is, again, I understand it's all black, so it's a clean look, but I wouldn't call that simple either. And the PlayStation 3, that had, number one, the launch PS3 had that Spider-Man font running across the top of it. It looked like a giant George Foreman grill. But prior to the PS5, the PS3 was like the king of the chonkers, right? In terms of just how big, in terms of how big the thing was. And if you compare those design aesthetics to, say, like an Xbox, which kind of just, again, it has that VCR look, and then you have the Xbox Series X now, which again almost looks like a PC tower. I think PlayStation, here's where I'm going with this. I think PlayStation has had a nice history, at least over the last couple console releases, of designing these flamboyant boxes.
Yeah, I think you know what? We're talking about it, and that's what they want. They want people to talk about it, the good, the bad. That's what they want. They want people talking about it. And when you comes down to it, it is the most wanted item right now. Like very often I see tweets whenever PlayStation 5 or no Xbox goes on sale. People are like, not worth it. I want the PS5. People want this device. No matter what it's going to look like, they want it because it's what's inside that counts.
It's the hottest piece of tech in 2020. There's nothing hotter that you can get right now than the PS5. And they're going to move, I don't know how many million, but I think they said that they wanted to move like 7 million by March 2021. They'll probably exceed that, I think. But
oh yeah,
I mean we'll see. But okay, so we get our spaceships, right? We get a friend to help us bring it inside, and we plug it in, and we turn it on. After that, I mean the user interface, the UI, right? So Micah, give me your take on how it feels once it's on, right? So you turn it on, set it up, pretty intuitive, I think.
So, and the question is, I mean, did you miss the first intro when you first turned it on? You probably didn't, and I'm trying to remember if I did, but you can go on YouTube to look at it. The very first boot up sound, whenever it's initialized, you'll only see it ever once, and it's just a great intro to get you started for gaming. But once you're past that, the process of getting set up was super easy. Like I set up both the Xbox and the PS5, and the fact that pull out my phone, pull out an app, log in, put in a code, scan it, however I did it. I don't even remember exactly because it wasn't a bad memory. It was just like, boom, I'm done. Started downloading some games and the UI.
Did you notice that when you were setting it up that the PlayStation 5 actually asked you if while you're completing the setup process, if you'd like to download one of your games while you're waiting? So in other words, like while you're finishing the setup, do you want to download one of your games? I thought that was one of the coolest things I'd ever. I was like, actually, yes, I would like to start downloading Spider-Man.
Yeah, I think it's the idea behind the multi-core design is simply the fact that, hey, we got multiple cores here and we can be efficient on how it's Sony being kind to my time, and I don't know if that's the right word to use for it. It's appreciating the time I have here. It's like, no, I don't want to spend time looking at a download progress bar. I want to just play a game. So just go put that in the background. It's not important, just updating in the background. Go ahead and download a game for me and everything. It's definitely nice.
And especially as like, look, as two established gentlemen as we are, I will say this: respecting my time. You have no idea how far that goes. So far for me. That goes to the moon and back for me to respect my time. And the fact that they were doing that's incredible. Now, by the way, Micah, you're a technical fellow. You understand the technical stuff. When you look at the internals in the hardware, all the flops, all the teraflops, and we count up PlayStation's flops versus Xbox's flops. Does the PS5 size up? How does it strike you technically?
So I think right now we can see what it can do with the previous generation games only. Mm-hmm. It's not next gen yet. We know it's not, because what this hardware, you have the potential to be able to crank out the most beautiful graphics with 60 frames per second. Heck, it even says it goes 120 frames per second, but we haven't seen that yet because it's going to take time to get to that next gen phase. But when it comes down to Xbox versus PS5, it's like, I think technically Xbox is a little bit more powerful. I think
more
it's
flops.
Yeah, more flops. But that's the thing, is just like, okay, you got more flops. What are you going to do with it? Okay. And we know Microsoft is building a brand of studios. They've got 15 different studios right now working on exclusives. It's just a question of, are those exclusives going to draw people in or not, or are people just going to stick with what they love, the IPs that they have with PlayStation.
And number one, most televisions couldn't even handle 120 hertz right now in most households, right? So that's one. And then two, Sony is very much, and I love this about Sony, it's very much less is more, right? So Microsoft goes on the spending spree, buy up all these different development studios, which is great. Bethesda, for $7.5 billion. I think that's an outrageous price to pay for that. But,
absolutely.
But I'll say this: the PlayStation Plus collection, right, that comes with every PS5. So you buy the PS5, you get access to the PlayStation Plus collection. It's a collection of about 20 games, and Sony has mentioned that they may or may not add to it, but it's 20 games that you get access to on day one. Now, my thought is this: the quality of those 20 games is so high, right? They are all, I think, must have or must play or somewhere in that ballpark, even if you don't like them from a genre standpoint, or it doesn't sort of, it's not exactly your cup of tea, so to speak. Those are very high quality games. I think that is a much better approach than, say, having 500 games of a mediocre quality that you have access to 24/7, 365. And the reason why I say the less is more is that, Sony recently, bought Insomniac, which I would argue that Insomniac is better than, if you remember when Microsoft bought up, I think they bought up Double Fine and a bunch of others. They went on a spending spree prior to buying Bethesda. Insomniac is better than, I think, any of the assortment of studios that you saw there. But when you look at the PlayStation 5, you have these games, you have the PlayStation Plus collection, the operating system itself, it actually feels similar to the PlayStation 4, in the sense that you sort of have that cross media bar, it's going left to right, and there's no themes this time, but it's very clean. I really like the way that they did this clean user interface. It's a clean operating system. It reminds me of PlayStation 4, but then they add a lot of the different sort of accoutrements that go along with it.
Yeah, I definitely agree.
What do you make of, because when you press the PlayStation button, you get the cards that pop up. It has that I forget what that's called. When you press the PlayStation button, it has that quick access menu that pops up, right? So what do you make of that? That's obviously the biggest change that I look at when I sort of look at the interface there.
Yeah, I think they're kind of borrowing the design that Microsoft went down the path of with the Xbox, with the idea of like cards to show off things. But when I look at the UI of PS5 versus Xbox right now, Xbox has like 5 or 6 different things I can go scrolling through right now, but PS5 has mainly the games and the media tab, and that's about it. You've got your little cards across the top, all your games, and then you've got, if you hit the PS button, you can go into your menu to be able to go through different things like your trophies, your profile, and different things like that. It's cleaner and it's less cluttered, and maybe over time they'll add to it, but I think they need to add what makes sense. Don't just add to add. Make it more of a conscious decision to add things, not necessarily, we partnered with this new company, Sony, the big Sony partnered with a new company who wants it on PlayStation. Don't just do that. Make it worthwhile for the consumer.
Exactly. And it speaks to the less is more. Although I will say this, that some of the menus, right? So in other words, as I'm going through, like, how long it takes me to look, as a prolific trophy hunter as I am, how long it takes me to get into my trophy list.
I love it.
Because it took me a while to find it, because you have to go down to your profile, you click on your profile, and then you go into trophies there. And the fact that there's still not a way to sort the trophies, right? So I can't sort my trophies by completion percentage. I can't tell you how much that bugs me. But all in all, I do think it is. It's the way you described it is very clean. I completely agree with that. And the last piece I think we should discuss with regard to the PS5 is maybe the most important, which is the controller, the DualSense controller. They went away with the naming, sort of the naming mechanic that they were using previously. The DualShock 1, 2, 3, 4. They've done away with that, and they've just renamed it DualSense. And the DualSense is arguably the best part of the console.
Yep.
Is this revolutionary controller that I think kind of leaves Microsoft in the dust a little bit with regard to the controllers themselves. I mean, the Xbox Elite controller is obviously extremely good. It's made of incredibly fine, qualities and metals and all these things. But DualSense with the haptics and the feedback, to me, I don't know. What do you think of the DualSense?
It is a auditory, tactile, visual experience, the PS5. You're not just watching something, you're experiencing something, and then you're like, oh my god, that sound came from the controller. What the heck? When I'm moving around on ice, it's feeling different, and it's great. And I think it's nice from the perspective that Sony did not just call it DualShock 5. They're saying, you know what, this is new. DualShock, that's a thing. It happened. We went through 2, 3, 4 iterations of it. Or actually 1, 2, 3, 4 iterations of it. Forgot about it being on PlayStation. But I think they're like, you know what? this is a new experience, and that's what they have over Xbox right now. It's a brand new controller, and it feels great. I love gaming with it. When I go back to, I've got the PS4 Pro next to me, so I can be able to play that. But when I go back to DualShock, I'm just kind of like, I have a little bit of disorientation for a second. Only a moment. You still have that memory feedback, but I do like that new controller.
And the DualShock 4, I mean, as much as I love the DualShock 4, I used to, I don't feel the same way anymore because with DualSense, but I used to hold the DualShock 4 and I'd be like, wow, this is like the best PlayStation controller ever made. But when I look at it now, all I see now is that giant light in the front. The light bar in the front is totally out of control. It's essentially a flashlight, right? And you could use it to see in a dark room.
Yeah, if you've ever tried, and this is what I tried to do a month ago. I tried to sneak playing on my iPad, DualShock connected to it, trying to sneak playing, but I couldn't because the entire room lit up with that DualShock, and it's like there was no way to turn it off. But now DualSense, it's just right there on the screen. It's subtle, and that's what it should have been from the start.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And between that and then everything else, like the touchpad, they introduced the touchpad. They decided to keep the touchpad.
Yeah.
I actually like the touchpad. I don't like it in the tactile sense, in the sense that, people can draw things on it or, use it to swipe up, down, left, right. I actually like it just as a giant button in the middle of the controller that pulls up my map usually, right?
Just smash it.
For me, it's like an intuitive map button. That's essentially what the touchpad is for me. But so that's good. So the controller, everything there with regard to the PS5, I think. By the way, we had one question that we took some questions so that this way we can talk about it during the show. And I think we already touched on this one, but the question we had for the PlayStation 5 review was, did they botch the launch? Did they botch the launch? And, with everything happening with COVID-19 and all of that, that it felt particularly messy. I think we kind of railed on them a little bit for that. I think we touched on that. But yeah, I mean, I think in terms of launches, I think it's a rousing success. So if you look at PlayStation 4 lifetime sales, they're bordering on, or they're trying to hit 120, 130 million sales. Do you think PlayStation 5 can ever hit that success, that meteoric success?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, and every time I had this conversation with people, like, this is the year Xbox is going to win. I'm like, maybe it'll win in the US again. I don't know, but worldwide, no way. PlayStation is a worldwide phenomenon. You're not going to beat it.
I never thought that Xbox was going to sort of win this generation. I mean, when Microsoft bought Bethesda, that sort of made me second guess a little bit. I was like, well, wait a minute, which way is this really trending? But I never really had a loss of faith that Sony would win the generation. But it does look like that they're going to hit 10 million sales very quickly. And within the first year, for sure, they're going to hit 10 million sales.
Absolutely.
And in the UK, they launched in the UK. They can't even keep it on the shelf. This is going to be a situation where I think it might rival it. If you were to say prior to the PS4 launch that the PS4 would sell 120, 130 million units, I'd have told you you're a crazy person. That would never happen, because that was like prior to the PS4 launch. If you remember, console gaming was dead. Everyone's going to game on their phones. There's no need for a console anymore, right? And then obviously PlayStation 4 goes on to be the second best, console of all time in terms of sales. If you exclude handhelds, right? The PlayStation 2 has like 155. That'll never be topped. It was a $99 DVD player in South America for as long as it was. So that will never be topped. But who knows? Maybe PlayStation 5 will top it.
Yeah.
This could be maybe PlayStation 5 sells 160 for all we know.
I think there's so much potential here. And, Sony, they haven't shown all their cards yet. We don't know their VR strategy. We don't even know if there will be another handheld. And if there will be another handheld, will it be linked to the PS5? And also at the same time, I can go take it down the road too. We don't know everything just yet. And it's gonna be a wild generation.
Yeah, I agree with that. And obviously with everything that they're doing with the console, very, very good so far. Strong sales. And it leads into actually our second topic, which is the launch lineup, right? So the games that we're playing on this new machine that we now have plugged in, right? So the games that we're playing, right? Just to read off a few here, launch lineup games. Miles Morales, Godfall, Sackboy, Demon's Souls, The Pathless, and, well, you can't forget Bug Snacks. And then, of course, which I think is I think is actually the best launch game in a long time, Astro's Playroom. Right. So I think that Astro's Playroom is low key game of the year 2020, minus some key exceptions. But I love Astro's Playroom, but the launch lineup, right? So Micah, talk to me about the launch lineup.
So you mentioned Astro's Playroom, and that's the first game I played because it was right there, go right into it, and I knew that was what I was going to be able to experience the DualSense with. And this entire time I'm playing, and I'm seeing all these references to other games, and sometimes references I don't even know and understand. And my boys are like, "What's this game from?" And it was like, "Look, it's God of War, and stuff like that." Great references in the game. The entire time I'm playing through this, I'm like, this feels like Mario. It feels like a different kind of platformer. It feels like the start of a new generation. My son, we beat it. We already got the platinum trophy in it. They helped me. It was great because I got little trophy hunters to farm out some of my work too. But they finished it. And my son's like, I want to play more Astros. I want to play more the original Astros game. And I'm like, I don't remember what game that was. I think it came with the VR or something like that. But they love playing that game, and it was just a really cute platformer. Way too short. I'm hoping they come out with something new.
Yeah, I mean, Astro's Playroom, shout out to Platinum Trophies. And I also got the Platinum Trophy in Astro's Playroom. I think it's when you talk about a pack-in game, right? So the only pack-in game that I can think of off the top of my head, and I don't know, I would really need to look into this because I'm talking about pack-in included with the console that would be of that caliber was Super Mario World with the Super Nintendo, right? That was like an absolutely legendary pack-in game. I think Astro's Playroom is so good. It is a love letter to PlayStation. It's criminally short. It really could have been this longer game. They could have, it's 4 levels, that you kind of go between. They could have made it 8 levels. I'd have been perfectly fine with that. But it's awesome. Obviously, look, I made a list of sort of the launch games by generation so that this way, look, let's compare the PlayStation 5 launch lineup, which I think is actually, and this is where I'm going with this. I think the PlayStation 5 launch lineup is historically strong. I think it's historically very strong, right? So PS1, and I'm just picking the top 3 games here. You can go through, I'm not listing Madden or Call of Duty. You can just assume that Call of Duty and Madden launch with essentially every console previous and really ever to come. That will always be the case. But PS1 launched with Ridge Racer, Rayman, and Battle Arena Toshinden. PS2 launched with Fantavision, Smuggler's Run, and Time Splitters. PS3 launched with Resistance Fall of Man, great game, Marvel Ultimate Alliance, and Mobile Suit Gundam. PS4 launched with Killzone Shadowfall, Resogun, and the illustrious Knack. And then PS5, the 3 games I'm listing here for PS5, Miles Morales, Demon's Souls, and then Sackboy. You could argue Godfall should be in there, but I don't know. Take your, dealer's choice there. You can pick whichever one you want. But when I look at the PS5 launch lineup versus historically those other PlayStation lineups, this is good. Miles Morales is an excellent game. Demon's Souls is an excellent game. Sackboy is very, very good. You could argue it's the best launch lineup in any PlayStation console that's not a mobile unit, right? Because PS Vita had a great launch lineup, included an Uncharted game, but we're not going to get into that.
Yeah, this launch lineup is just absolutely perfect to showcase what the new generation is about, what it's graphically capable of. Playing Miles Morales, it was graphically beautiful, in fidelity mode, just being able to see the real-time tracing, these perfectly waxed floors, showing off the New York City skyline and everything. But once you go into performance mode, it's so hard to go back to fidelity mode because you're at 60 frames per second and you really see what you've been missing out on this entire time. These previous consoles have not been able to hit that peak of 60 frames, and it just shows that these new consoles have some power behind them. And this is what PC gamers definitely always talk about. It's I can go 60 frames per second, unlike your console games, and it's just they've been right the longest time. That's the big thing. It's just seeing what these consoles are about, and great games. Miles Morales, already beat it, working on the Platinum Trophy. Sackboy started it, have not finished it yet, but definitely cute. And I love it because now I've got another game that the secondary controller I bought will work with. So nice little co-op game. Might even get a third controller since it goes up to 4 players. But definitely appreciating these particular games simply because of the fact that it gives us something to do for a little bit.
Now, I'm one trophy away from the platinum in Miles Morales, the bronze trophy for beating the game a second time on New Game Plus. That is currently what I'm working through. But I think Miles Morales, right? So you could argue that it's just quote unquote more Spider-Man, right? So Spider-Man 2018, one of my favorite PS4 games. I mean, probably their handling of that particular Marvel IP, probably one of the big reasons why Sony bought them. Probably one of the big reasons why they're now part of the first party. And, this is more Spider-Man. And that's exactly what I wanted out of it. They introduced some new abilities and things like that, which are pretty cool. But Miles Morales, great game. Demon Souls, which is what I'm playing through sort of now as well. It is so difficult. I'm not super familiar with From Software games in terms of the Dark Souls collection. I played Bloodborne. But these games are so difficult. Is there any way, put it this way, Micah, is this a game that you would get into? Would you get into Demon Souls? Is that something that you would ever venture to, almost embarrass yourself with?
So I like games that give me challenge. I don't like games that make me want to throw the controller. I hear a lot of people say that's the point of Demon Souls. That's the point of these games, is to make you cry, essentially. I've seen the memes. It's just like people talking about difficult games and just like Demon Souls, like that's cute. It's supposed to be a challenging game, and it's supposed to make you want to cry, because that's the whole point of the game. My understanding is that you die, you keep dying, and every single mistake you make, you are punished for it. And some people love that, because to be able to overcome that, man, that's a great feeling, to be able to overcome a difficult level. But to constantly have that at every turn, I don't know if I could get into it. I'm going to wait until it's on sale at some point, simply because of the fact that I'm a little bit of a patient gamer when it comes to games like that. I'll wait until it's the greatest hits collection in a couple years. I'm sure we'll get there at some point, but right now I'm going to take a pass on it for the launch.
Maybe it'll be part of the PS Plus collection. But I'll say this, and it will definitely be on sale. I played through. I'm only through the very first sort of boss encounter, which is essentially like an extended tutorial. And I swear I played from, it must have been like 6 o'clock in the afternoon until like 10 o'clock at night, like 4 to 5 hours just to get through the first boss, which is just really meant to teach you how to play the game. And it took me like 5 hours to get through that. And it was really difficult, like just getting to the shortcuts every time. So that's how it works, right? So if you're not familiar with Demon Souls, if you're not familiar with From Software type games, or Souls-likes as they're, referred to, there's no checkpoints, but you do unlock these shortcuts that then shorten the length that you have to travel between the beginning of the level and the boss, because as there are no checkpoints, you always start at the beginning of the level. So it doesn't matter if you die on the boss itself, you are right back at the beginning where you started. So, but you unlock these shortcuts, and every time I would unlock a shortcut, it felt like the biggest sell. This is the appeal of the game, and this is what I really genuinely like about it. When I
Yoshi has some comments,
but this is the appeal of the game, right? This is the appeal of the game for me, right? So when you get these shortcuts, the feeling that you get, right, the sense of accomplishment is so real.
Dopamine rush. Yeah, absolutely.
And it's just it's a very, very real experience. So Demon Souls, and then Godfall and Sackboy. Sackboy I have preloaded. I'm gonna play it at some point. I haven't gotten to it yet. Godfall the same. Any interest in playing either of these two titles?
So Sackboy, definitely playing it. So people who have played Little Big Planet before are used to the level design choices of what they've done, and they've taken out the creativity aspect of Little Big Planet. I haven't been a big Little Big Planet fan. Played Little Big Planet 4, a little bit of it, didn't really like it. The boys played a little bit more of it than I did. But Sackboy, I feel, is finally putting a whole story together in this Little Big Planet franchise with their main star, Sackboy. Has a whole little story of, something happening. And I think it's going to be a fun platformer to get through. Definitely has some cooperative elements to it that other games do not right now. And that's the big thing. It's like this launch lineup has a lot of first person and single player games only, but Sackboy is nice when you've got 2 10-year-old boys who want to play the same thing at the same time. No longer have to set a timer. You can just let them both play.
And this is a game that me and my fiance will play, right? So in other words, we will sit down and play this cooperatively. I love the cooperative aspect of it, right? So, and by the way, shout out to the Tearaway on the PlayStation Vita, which is a Media Molecule game. So when you talk about Little Big Planet, you talk about that trilogy of games, right? Little Big Planet originally developed by Media Molecule. Obviously, they do Dreams now. This particular game, Sackboy: A Big Adventure, developed by Sumo Digital. So this is a different developer than normally who would develop Little Big Planet. But I think you can see, the TLC and the attention to detail that was put in there for this. So I do think that they've done a fantastic job. I can't wait to get into it. I do want to play cooperatively as well. I saw the trophy list. The trophy list doesn't look that bad. It actually looks like a really straightforward platinum. So I will definitely be doing that. That's for sure. And then Godfall looks kind of like a little generic to me, but I could get into it just because of the fact that launch lineups are inherently a little bit thin, right? There's not a lot, going on, and at least until maybe Horizon or maybe Cyberpunk, some of these larger titles start coming out. So I might play Godfall just by virtue of the fact that, Demon Souls is in fact killing me and I need to do something different.
Yeah, I think Godfall, I'm going to put it in that same category as Demon Souls. When it's on sale, I'll definitely check it out. I haven't heard anybody wowing over it like I have over Miles Morales. Like Miles Morales was my number one pick as the game I wanted to play first. But with Godfall, I haven't even seen gameplay footage. I have no idea what it looks like. I just have not been interested. And I'm surprised I'm not, because, I'm reading the description. High fantasy. It reminds me of a lot of different games I've played before.
Reviews on Godfall are definitely lukewarm. If you look at the reviews for Godfall, it's very medium, very milquetoast in terms of its reception. So we'll see how that goes. Like I said, I'll play it at some point if there's just nothing else to do. But in the meantime, it is Demon Souls all the way. Now, with regard to the question that we fielded for this, and we kind of already touched on this, but I'll ask the question directly. Is this the best launch lineup in PlayStation history?
I definitely have to say it is. I think once you've come to the 5th generation of your console, you've finally figured out what you have that the competition doesn't. Yeah, Xbox has every single backwards compatibility game, and they got Xbox 360 games, which I love to go back to sometimes, right? But they definitely figured out, we've got a couple different games here that we know you're going to love. You love Spider-Man, you're going to love Miles Morales. Everybody that didn't get introduced to Demon Souls before, you're going to get introduced to that now. I think this launch lineup's great.
Now, you mentioned that you had gotten both consoles at launch. You'd gotten PlayStation and Xbox. I did not. I opted to not go with the Xbox console. But the third topic 3, is the console wars. And I personally love the console wars. I'm a fan of the console wars. I know that there's more synergy now than ever before, right? I think it was at the Game Awards where you had, Reggie Fils-Aimé from Nintendo and Phil Spencer from Microsoft and Sean Layden from Sony, and everyone's on the same page, and everyone's kind of on sort of having this moment, a very synergistic moment, very nice. But the whole notion of, these companies playing off each other, competing with each other, and sort of a playful ribbing of the fans, one fan to another fan, has always been historically something that people have enjoyed. I've always enjoyed it. But the question being, are the console wars good?
I think so. It comes down to everything in life. Competition is the best thing to keep anybody on their toes. Like, if you got Android and iPhone, there's a reason I pick iPhone simply because of the fact that Android will make iPhone better. And not always like a new feature comes out, you're going to immediately get on an iPhone. Not necessarily. And the same thing here. I think the idea of backwards compatibility, that was Microsoft's big play, right? They were like, hey, you can play every single Xbox 360 game. And we had no idea what Sony's strategy was for PlayStation until 2 months ago, maybe. I didn't even know if you could play PlayStation 4 games. I assumed the console was capable of, and I assumed Sony might do the good guy thing and let me play a few PlayStation 4 games, but they weren't. They were being hushed about it. And, they have their reasons. But I think the perspective of the competition is the main reason why you want it, simply because of the fact that without it, you have stagnation. And it's the last thing we need is a stagnant single console we all play.
I understand the criticism. I don't want to make it seem like I don't understand the criticism of the console wars, right? So the criticism of the console wars being that console wars are toxic. Console wars it just generates all this negative energy, and it's all these, the negativity that exists with it. Yeah. And I don't want to make it seem like I don't understand that. I do understand it. The console wars are fun as long as you don't take it too seriously, as long as you're having a good time with it, right? The best example I can give, I think, that is analogous to the console war is if anyone was a professional wrestling fan when WWF and WCW, then WWF was going WCW, and they had the Monday Night Wars and all this, and it was just this incredible rivalry that existed in that moment, right? I don't think anyone looks at Red Sox Yankees and says that's toxic, right? It's good-natured, to use your word, Micah, competition, right? And the competition makes everyone better. One of the worst things I think that happened to the WWE was the fact that they just obliterated WCW, and then there was no competition. And that's when stagnation begins, and then that's when the quality of the product starts to decline. The fact that Xbox exists, right? I think it makes Sony better. I think it makes PlayStation better. I think one of the worst things that could happen for PlayStation is for Xbox to go away. I think that would generate a ton of complacency. That's where then you would start seeing way less consumer-friendly things, right? Where if there's no one else out there to take the business and you're the only player out there, and it is that monopolistic, that is not good for you as a consumer. I can tell you that right now.
Absolutely. And, we keep mentioning, Microsoft and Sony, but you got the third little guy there, Nintendo. And I call him little. He's not. Nintendo's huge. I mean, Nintendo is there for the gamer that doesn't even know that they're a gamer. It's like, I like Mario. I like Zelda sometimes, It's there for those kind of people. And it's great for all of us because, we love those IPs. And as much as I think, well, what if Sony bought Nintendo, or what if Microsoft bought them? I don't want that to ever happen, honestly. I want Nintendo to succeed as a company on their own, and they are succeeding on their own. They're like, we don't have to be the most powerful console. We just have to have great games, and that's what it's about.
And they're definitely out there doing their own thing. They're a weird company. I mean, Nintendo's they've always been weird, right? They were just a Japanese toy maker that decided that they were going to make video games, and that's kind of still the same energy that they have today, right? If you look at the Wii U or the GameCube, right, it's just they're such obvious toys, right? That's 100% what they are. And for a lot of people who say that, well, the PlayStation and the all the exclusives that they generate, right? So whether it's The Last of Us or Spider-Man or Uncharted, what have you, right? Exclusives don't matter, right? Sony didn't invent that sort of mantra. They didn't invent that business model, right? That's always been the Nintendo business model. They move hardware based on exclusive software IP, right? When the Breath of the Wild comes out, Switch is going to move consoles. It's just the way it's always been, right? Animal Crossing is going to move consoles, right? These are exclusives, games that are exclusive to Nintendo, right? And they really don't, I don't want to say they don't care about anything else, or they don't care about other sort of third-party, developers and software and stuff. They do always kind of tip the hat and, sort of say, hey, look, we're bringing Doom on Switch. So they do kind of do that. But make no bones about it, right? They are all about the exclusives, right? They're more about the exclusives than Sony are. They're more Sony than Sony. But yeah. I think that when you talk about, Nintendo competing, and this is why I don't necessarily include them in that conversation. I mean, they belong in the conversation. But the reason why I don't instinctively include them is because it really doesn't feel like Nintendo and Sony are competing. It just seems like two completely different demographics, right? Nintendo is a demographic for a much younger tilt than Sony would ever try to pitch to.
Yeah, no, I can see that point, and that's why we always go back to Sony Xbox. I mean, even last generation, the launch was PS4 versus Xbox One, right? So, I mean, that's why we often pit these together. And that's why we're pitting it together now. Xbox Series X came out 2 days before the PlayStation 5. So that's why we talk about it. And these two consoles have been gearing up for this. And I'm sure, you know, they keep hearing rumors of, I think PlayStation 5 is going up to 10 teraflops. We need to go up to 12, you know, and it's just this kind of like, you know, crazy. I'd love to be the fly on the wall in some of these meetings, like where people have been planning these sessions for years. And the final decision is just like, hey, it's 2020. We got to go. You know, we're launching in November. We said that, you know, last year, whenever we announced we're going. And it's just great. It's good for the consumers, you know, because and when you mention toxicity, the toxic part comes down to when you're constantly on Twitter commenting on Sony posts saying Xbox is better, or you're on Xbox saying Sony is better. You know, I get it from the perspective of if I'm 12 years old again, but I can't get into that mentality anymore simply because of the fact that I look at these two consoles as two different machines for two different kinds of people. Like some people love Xbox brand as much as you and I love the Sony brand. They've been playing on Xbox since, you know, the Halo days, and it's just where their friends are, you know? So you just got to look at this in good nature. You know, it's just fun. It's supposed to be fun. It's not supposed to be, you're not supposed to feel negative about these things.
And that's the thing. Like, that's why I say, like, it's good fun, right? So in other words, as long as you're having fun with it, I think that's what it is. But I think that when I talk about the demographics, right, I think that PlayStation 5 is good for, it's a console for adults who have kids who happen to like games. Whereas Nintendo is a great console for kids with adults who happen to like games, right? So in other words, I think it's just a little bit inverse. And Xbox tends to more play in the backyard, I think, of Sony. So I think they tend to play in that same demographic. But again, like I said, to compare it to like Red Sox and Yankees, that's very much what it feels like to me. It feels like good sport. It feels like good fun. If it ever, you know, if you are taking the console war that serious, where it's just like really, where it's messing up your day, then I think you're doing it wrong. I think at that point, then you're probably on the wrong page at that point.
Definitely.
So, but beyond that, Micah, look, here's where we're at, right? So the question that we have for the console wars, which is that, does it contribute to toxic behavior, right? So the question comes in as, gamers are known for having a toxic culture. Do the console wars contribute to online toxic behavior? So when we talk about the negative aspect of it, do you think it contributes to the toxicity?
I think the very nature of the fact that there is a duality here, Xbox versus PlayStation, you are going to have fanatics in both camps, right? And just like if we were to talk politics, the exact same thing. You're going to have fanatics in both camps, people who are diehard, I will kill you for loving PlayStation kind of people. And you and I aren't like that. I mean, we're definitely the kind of people that can appreciate both elements of things. You know, as much as you love PlayStation, you look at Xbox and you go, man, I respect that choice. I wouldn't have spent $7.5 billion on Bethesda, but hey, you know, I love the fact that you're making my brand want to compete here. And I think that's what you made a point to earlier. You just got to take a step back and look at it in good nature fun. It's supposed to be fun. Don't take it so seriously. And
the memes, even the memes, especially the memes against the PS5, they're so funny. Like you called it out earlier, saying that the PS5 looks like a Wi-Fi router, and you had people taping like white sheets of paper on either side of their Wi-Fi router and taking a picture of it, being like, pre-ordered the PS5. It's so funny, right? So, but it's again, that's what it's supposed to be, right? So like when you think back to, like, the NES launched in I think 1985, and then Genesis came out. Well, the Master System came out the next year, but the Sega Master System came out the next year, but the Sega Genesis didn't come out until I think 89, 4 years later. But that whole Nintendo versus Sega console war, that was epic. I thought that was, because like that was right when that was when we were growing up. Then you had Sega boys, and you had Sega kids, and you had Nintendo kids, right? And it was just this real battling it out. And to me, that never struck me as like a real negative time. That to me struck me as a very fun time.
I think the only negativity would come about if you were one of those kids who just could not get a console at all,
Right.
you know, and
Right.
we definitely all knew those kind of friends, you know, because they would come over and play with us. And I think, yeah, back then it was cool. Sega versus Nintendo, and then Sony.
By
What?
the way, Sony came in real hot. If you remember when the PS1 launched a couple years later, there was one commercial I remember. I don't know when it was, but there was one commercial for the original PlayStation where it was like Crash Bandicoot standing outside the Nintendo headquarters with a megaphone, like calling out Mario in some outrageous commercial. It was just like, hey, you guys got these graphics? And then it was like a whole PlayStation commercial about that. But that was, I mean, that to me, that you talk
That's
about
funny.
good natured. That's so funny.
I mean, that comes down to, remember when Degeneration X went after WCW? That I mean, it's basically like, instead of ignoring your competition, just taking the war straight to them and being like, "Hey, buddy, we're gonna bite into your competition. I mean, we already know I'm going to, but we're gonna tell people we're going to, and we're gonna have fun with it."
Here's the thing, Micah. There's a reason why they refer to it as the golden age of wrestling, right? There's a reason why they refer to it as the golden age, because it was just, again, the amount of fun being had was out of control. But I digress. Micah, we should probably wrap it up here. I mean, ultimately, how I'd like to end, right? So we can end it a different way every time if we'd like, but how I'd like to end it is, you know, normally we would talk about, you know, what we're currently playing, right? So what do you plan on playing this week, right? And, you know, obviously we kind of talked about it, Miles Morales, things like this, right? So what do you plan on getting into?
So, finishing up some trophies for Miles Morales. I got my son. He's helping out. I started New Game Plus after they finished the game after I went away for the weekend, and he's like, "I'm going to New Game Plus it." So I think he's going to get the trophy before I even finish the game. But that's fine. I mean, that's the point of this system, is that, you know, we're all having fun with it, and I can set up multiple accounts if I really cared. But I think I'm going to be switching between Miles Morales, God of War, because I'm finishing up collectibles on that game right now. And enjoying the fact that I can just play the previous generation games. I went into this new launch with like, man, I got a backlog of PlayStation 4 games. I even debated with myself. I said, I really don't need to get this console right now. I knew I was going to. I at some point down this generation, I knew I was going to get these consoles, but I was like, I don't have to. And that's just, I think that's what I'm going to be playing. It's a little bit more Miles Morales, God of War, getting into Sackboy, getting back into that, and then maybe even trying to get my wife to play Astra's Playroom, just so she can feel the controller. I definitely want to see somebody who's like playing something to be like, whoa, what the, you know, because my boys, you know, they were kind of used to that, but they weren't wowed. I want to see somebody wowed by these controller features. So yeah, I think that's what it's going to be on my radar the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, and ultimately, the controller, when you talk about Astro's Playroom, it's very much like it's very much like a almost like a I don't want to say a religious experience, but it's like you have to feel it to believe it. You have to understand it. You have to experience it.
Yeah.
Right? So in other words, you have to, until you actually pull those triggers and feel what it's like, the rockets blasting off, right? Pulling the triggers. It's something that you have to experience. And I mean, as long as, by the way, you mentioned your kids playing Miles Morales, man, as long as the platinum trophy counts for your account, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And that's what I was saying, is like, if I really wanted to be a purist about it, and I'm thinking about doing it simply because of the fact that my one son, he's starting to ask questions about trophies, and I asked him, I said, "Do you want your own account?" He said, "Yeah." So I like that the moment I boot up the PS5 too, there, and this was with PS4 too, you could have multiple accounts signed in. I want to see how the experience is with PS5 compared to PS4, like with multiple accounts logging in. Because the experience I had with Xbox One was you have to sign in. Oh, now you have to go put in the password for this account and everything. I'm like, oh, come on. It's like signing in between accounts was ridiculous on Xbox. And I wonder if they've changed it. We'll have to see. But I want to see if PlayStation's a little bit more easier, just so everyone can be able to have their own account. And you know, at some point they're going to be growing up, going out of the house. I kind of want to be friends with them one day. It'd be a nice little parting gift for them, is that like, hey, for the past 10 years you've been in my house, you've had your own PlayStation account, look at all the achievements you've gotten, things like that. Gonna get all sentimental here, but it's the kind of thing I'm thinking of.
make them want the trophies. I think that's a very fair thing. You know what I mean? You got to want the trophies. You know, you got to ask for them. You know what I mean? And then you get the trophies, right? Once you ask for the trophies, then you get the trophies. And then beyond that, I actually like trophies beyond. I mean, obviously the achievement metric and all that stuff. You know, but they're actually great timestamps too. So in other words, I always think back, like when did I play that game? Oh man, I beat Heavy Rain on the PS3. When did I platinum that game? And you can actually go back. It's a great timestamp. And the fact that now on PS5 that they're including sort of the small video clips. I mean, that to me is a huge life upgrade. I love that. That's incredible.
That's great.
But for me, I'm going to finish up Miles Morales. I'm very close to finishing Miles Morales, right? So actually, as you know, Mike, I have 99 platinum trophies. Miles Morales will be 100. It'll be my 100th platinum trophy. And I'm waiting for the right moment to do that. So in other words, I have it set up. I have the last mission queued up, right? So I will get platinum trophy number 100, but I think it's going to be an ordeal. We don't know what kind of an ordeal it's going to be, but we're going to celebrate. Me and my girl, we're going to celebrate somehow doing the 100. And then obviously I'm going to start working on Sackboy. That's going to be the next one. And I'm going to see exactly how much I hate myself in going through Demon Souls and seeing how much punishment can I take, right? And that's what we're going to find out. We're going to slowly find out my tolerance for frustration and madness, really.
Sounds awesome.
Micah, this has been the first episode of the PlayNation Podcast. Thank you, everyone, for listening. And thank you, everyone, for being a part of this, right? If you have any questions, right? If you have any questions you would like to ask us for the next show, please feel free to write in at show@playnationpodcast.com. So please write in show@playnationpodcast.com. Micah, am I missing anything? Is there anything else we need to touch on before we sign off?
I think the one thing that's been on my mind, and I've told so many friends this, don't buy any of these consoles on eBay for more than MSRP. You and I got lucky, but you and I both know had we not gotten lucky, we would not be spending any money on this. And I see so many people going like, I'm going to do it. I'm like, don't do it. These consoles are great. They're lovely. They're awesome. They're amazing. They are not worth a single penny more than MSRP. Don't do that to yourself. They don't have, they have some exclusives, you know, PlayStation, that you can't get on any others, but it's like, you just wait. The supply is going to meet the demand. I promise you it will.
Mike, I love that you said that. And, you know, two things, right? So first and foremost, most of the games, including Miles Morales, right? Unless you really, really, really want to play Demon Souls or Godfall for that matter, everything's available on PS4. So don't feel like you have to do it just to play these games. You can play Miles Morales on your PS4. It works, right? And it works just fine, right? So that's the first piece. The second piece would be, again, the sentiment of what you said. I completely agree. Do not.
Yoshi agrees.
Yeah, Yoshi agrees. But do not contribute to scalping and to the people who sort of promote scalping. Even if you're a millionaire and you have the money, don't encourage the behavior, right? Do not encourage the behavior.
Absolutely.
Even if you have the money, don't spend it. Don't encourage scalping. Don't encourage scalpers. I understand everyone's got to make a living and everyone's got to turn a buck. I totally get that. But it's, especially if you're tight on money, it's just, like you said, Micah, it's just not worth it.
Even if you're not tight on money, I mean, hey, if you don't have a good 4K TV, I mean, get that. There's some great Best Buy deals even I'm looking at, like going, ooh, I don't know if I want to do that to myself after spending $1,000 on two consoles. But at the same time, I'm still 1080p, so I have to one day experience the beauty of 4K one day. But is it going to be this year or next year? I don't know yet.
You and most Americans, Mike. I don't think we've crossed the 50% mark in terms of households with 4K televisions. I still think it's under 50%. But yeah, no, look, absolutely. When you get that 4K television and you see Miles swinging on those smooth, those buttery smooth 60 frames on that 4K,
you're selling me.
Micah, until next time, this has been the PlayNation Podcast. Please, like I said, right into the show. We look forward to hearing from you. And thank you very much.
All right. Thank you all.
Bye, guys.